What's up, everyone? Welcome to Cracker. This is Loki's Den, and I am your host, Loki Goblin 13. This is like a 9th attempt at making this video, because when I made them before, it just seemed way too confusing, so I'm going to try to simplify it in a way and make it a little more grouped, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. If you watch most of my videos lately, I've been kind of on a g.i.joe kick. I guess I'm just trying to relive my youth. So this video, you're not going to see anything new, but you're going to see just stuff that I thought was interesting and how things change. So it's part review, part it's amazing how things have changed over the years. What's interesting is that you never really know how much stuff is really out there, especially on YouTube, until you go looking for it. Like, I was typing in g.i.joe stuff, and I've seen so many reviews on the old figures, the vehicles, the playsets. It's crazy, but it's cool though. I'm like, oh my god, I remember that. So I'm not really going to go into that, but this is just more of a, like I said, a review / video of showing things, how they've changed over the years, and how the way the times of the world the way the world was at certain times, that's what they reflected in the cartoon and the toy and stuff like that. You'll see. I don't know the whole history of g.i.joe, and I don't plan on ever knowing the whole history. When I was a kid, I loved the cartoon. I watched it all the way up until it was done in the 90s, like 93 I think it was done, or something like that, when they finally said the hell with it, we're done with this. I even liked the 90s cartoon. A lot of people didn't like the late 80s, 89, 93 kind of cartoon thing. I thought it was cool. The other ones were better, but the newer ones were just as cool, because they had a lot of new characters. Some stuff got a little tedious. You're like, really? Even as a kid, I'm just like, I don't want that. But the real point of the cartoons that you don't realize as a kid, because you're so busy, engulfed in like the characters and stuff like that. The real point of the cartoon was to push toys. That was the whole purpose of cartoons, especially back in the day in the 80s, was to push toys. They'd make a cartoon, or they'd come up with an idea for a toy, and they'd make a cartoon about it and see how the cartoon did. If the cartoon did well, they'd put out the toys and see how the toys did. If the toys made money, they'd continue the cartoon. If the toys flopped, they got rid of the cartoon. Me personally, I think I only have like 1 or 2 of the old original g.i.joe figures. Well, I'm not going to say original. The original ones are like, that big. But the early 80s, the 84 g.i.joes, I think I have like 1 or 2. I think I have Duke and I have something else. I think there's only like 13 of them, or 13 original Joes. I couldn't tell you. Me personally, when I was collecting, it was mostly late 80s. I'm going to say maybe like 86 and up, give or take. I would get a few here and there, and I was hooked on the cartoon, but they were cheap back in the day, but like everything else, if you looked at prices from the 80s now, you're like, that's extremely cheap. But back then, it was expensive. It evens out, I guess, in a long way. Like, certain figures, like g.i.joes, were like $2 a piece, $2.99 mostly. So you're spending $3, but you're like, that's nothing, compared to now. You're spending, you go to a toy store and you're spending $10 minimum on a figure. But anyway, I wrote stuff down just to try to keep it on track, because, like I said, I kind of veered off into my nostalgia. Hopefully you'll enjoy. One of the most recent vehicles I've gotten was the Buzzbore, the Cobra Buzzbore, which it came with a little removable missile that you pulled off and would pretend to shoot it. That's what was cool back in the day in the 80s and earlier than that in the 90s. You pretended everything. Like, you didn't have everything handed to you. Like, you pretended this guy could turn invisible or whatever. You didn't have things that actually did it. But this thing came with 2 missiles that, when I got it from the eBay guy, I only had the 1 missile, but I actually do have the second one in a box somewhere. So I do have it technically complete once I find the missile, the other one. But I wanted to say the pros and cons of this thing. The pro is that it's really cool, and I like how the buzzsaw, spins. But there's only 2 real cons to this thing that suck. Is that it's a real bitch to get a figure in there, and a real bitch to get the figure out. And it doesn't always stand straight because of the buzzsaw. So like, it'll either lean one way or the other. They should have made the buzzsaw up a little more so that this would be flat, but you can see how it's got it going underneath. But other than that, it's a cool toy. Alright, we're going to move on. Like I said, this is going to be like comparison just to show how things change. Just also show how companies, in a way, were greedy, because they wanted people to go out and buy like the same figure a dozen times, or buy, the same figure with different costumes, because he's different on the show now. I have to get the new costume. you'll see what I'm talking about. The early 80s Joe, the 84 one, and so on. Basically, it wasn't just about the G.I. Joes or the Cobra figures. It was more about their accessories on top of the character, and also the vehicles that they had. Like, they had tanks with, missiles, and helicopters that the blades rotated, all these cool things. But it wasn't until the later 80s, like I'm going to say like 85, 86, when they really started putting accessories in there and really started pumping out the vehicles that kicked a lot of ass. Any G.I. Joe collector will tell you those were just awesome, awesome vehicles. And that's what it was. Like I said, the show would show all these things and be like, then you turn around and be like, oh my god, you go bug your parents, like, I want that tank. And the tank was like $40. You're like, oh, we had to wait till Christmas, and, Christmas back in the day was massive, and the toy stores made, billions. Well, more like millions back in the day, but, you'd watch the show and you'd wait till Christmas or your birthday, and you're like, I got my tank, and I got, a dozen Vipers and all this stuff. But again, they also, it's funny because, like I said, this is how they made the money. On the show, you got a character like a Bat, which is a robot trooper, basically. Battle Android Trooper, that's what it stands for. And they had, like, Cobra Commander had, millions of these things would march out, and they'd, G.I. Joe, they have their laser weapons, and they'd destroy them, and 3 more would pop up, and, like I mentioned with my friend, he had money, and that's all his thing was G.I. Joe. That's all he focused on. That's all he wanted to do was G.I. Joe. And he had like 100 of these, 100 bats, and I'm just like, oh my, he had them all lined up, and I'm like, wow. Whereas me, the way I collected them, I only got 1 bat. I bought 1 bat, and then I wanted to get, I got a different Viper, or I got, a Televiper, and got a Crimson Guard, and, I didn't buy more than 1, even though on the show there was always more than 1. I only bought 1 because I always wanted to get another figure rather than buy a dozen of the same character. I'm like, what's the point? So I guess I made myself unique. I'm like, I only have 1 of those. Why do you have 10? So I justified it. But anyway, this character, as you can see, he's in rough shape. I gotta get used to this camera over here now. He's missing his decal, which was his circuits, and he had a backpack that had like a grenade launcher that attached to his hand. He had a hand that came to here, and also a claw. So there was that. And of course, toy companies back in the day, and still in a way now, but more back in the day, they always made the parts small because they wanted you to lose them. So you'd turn around and have to go and buy more figures. Back in the day, I'm going to use that a lot. You're going to see that term. Coca-Cola, that's right, product placement. Making money. Back in the day, it was not impossible, but it was extremely hard to get replacement parts for a character. Like, if you lost their weapons or their backpack, you were screwed. You had to basically go out and buy another one of those figures, which the toy company loves. Hey, you lost the stuff, come on down and buy another one. Which wasn't too bad with Cobra figures, because like I said, with a bat, if you lost the stuff, you bought another bat, and it's the same thing on the show. They have dozens of bats, so you're kind of like, all right, whatever. But with actual G.I. Joes, like say, let's say wetsuit, the old wetsuit. When you lost his stuff, you didn't want to buy another one of him because you're like, all right, there's only 1 wetsuit. Why am I buying? Why would I have 2? I don't know. That's just the way my mind worked, I guess. But yeah, that's what it basically was. Like nowadays, you can go on eBay and you can find parts. You can find replacement parts, weapons, whatever, and pay what you're willing to pay. But back then, it was harder. An interesting thing they had back then, which my mom had gotten me, because I did lose a lot of weapons, as you can see. A lot of these things are missing, all their stuff. In the middle 80s, like I said, when I was getting into G.I. Joe, and I was like obsessed. Like I always watched the show, but I wasn't fully obsessed with the stuff until later on in my childhood. They started selling, I guess, because companies got so many complaints that how do I get parts? How do I get this stuff? They started selling packs, which basically, the pack wasn't even really meant for G.I. Joe. It wasn't. It was like a generic pack. And they would say, like, oh, goes with G.I. Joe, like, to try to, get it out there. I personally don't know if it was just the toy stores themselves that sold these and just put the thing like, oh, this can work with G.I. Joe, or the actual companies pumped it out and said, here you go. One of these packs that my mom had bought was actually one of the only packs she bought. Because I was a little disappointed, but not too much. I was just kind of like, because I used to go to my mom like, I'm missing all these guns, I'm missing all their backpacks, I'm missing this helmet, I'm missing this, I'm missing that. And my mom went to the store one time and got this package that was similar to the G.I. Joes, like it was like a blister card, whatever they call it, and it had like a dozen of these missiles, these green missiles, and it had these weird skis, and just a bunch of different missiles and these weird things, and I'm just like, had like an oil, like you've seen upstairs, the oil drum, just weird things, and I'm just like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, what the hell? Now, what's interesting is, like I said, this is how they make it, like, so it could go to a G.I. Joe. If you look at this ski, if you look at the middle of it, that design in the middle of, like, that hole, every vehicle that G.I. Joe had, almost every vehicle, had a protruding part that would hold a missile, or you would put a missile on, or whatever it is, that would fit this. Like, you would put this, like, for instance, this is from the Rage tank. See how it has the similar thing? There was a part sticking out of the Rage tank. You actually put this missile on it, so it would lock it into place in a way. So that's basically what this was. Like, well, that's what I thought they were, and that's what you could use them for. Was you could put this on a tank, or the Snowcat, which is obviously what this would go for. And that would be like a ski. But the thing that sucked about it is that it wasn't really meant to put like a G.I. Joe foot in there. Like if you take let's take Wetsuit. You put his foot in there, and it won't fit. It's too, big or too small, whatever you want to do. And like I said, it came with these missiles. Now, which I did, which I don't know if that's what they were meant for, but my imagination, again, you had to use it. I would take the fin of the missile, and I would stick it through the back part of the ski, and it would make like a little, thing like that. And I would pretend, I'd send this down the hill or whatever, and then it would launch off of there, or it would explode into whatever, and again, imagination. But there's those things that they sold. They did sell like guns and backpacks, but I never got any of those. I just got a package of that, and I told them, I was like, no, I don't want any more of that. So moving on, like I said, the early G.I. Joes were accessories and vehicles, and the later G.I. Joes, like in 86, 85, 86, 87, 88, was no different. They basically, they focused on how much stuff can we put in there that you're either going to lose or you're going to, whatever, and you can buy more figures. But the thing that was interesting, like here, I'll show you how it's always about the accessories. Look at this guy called Hardball. He came with a grenade launcher that actually had a removable clip grenade round. So, a lot of times people would lose that, and you're like, oh, well, that sucks now. But that was just cool. It rotated. Obviously use your imagination again, but that was just a sick, like, little, figure, like a interesting piece. And like I mentioned, like the vehicles, some vehicles came with like giant missiles that would lock into place and they would spring out, well, mostly the 90s ones had the spring stuff, which I'm going to get into. I'm getting ahead of myself again. That's why I got to keep my notes. But again, with an example, like I said, I'm going to kind of jump around, is you look at the old Bat. Then in the 90s, well, late 80s, 89, they made the new version of the Bat when they redid the show. You can definitely tell when they redid the show. The newer versions were more colorful, and like I said, everything had to have some kind of an action. This Bat, as you can see, is similar to the other one, but here's his grenade launcher. He's got his hand, and this is like the backpack, but they turned it into a missile launcher where you can connect it to his hand, and then it came with a missile. Stick the missile in there and hit the button and it would shoot out, which I don't think I have the missile for it anymore, but you get the point. Which again, I'm going off track. Get into that in a moment. Tell you about that in a moment. Also in the 80s, late 80s, whatever, 85, 86, 87, I don't even know when the hell it was, they made the G.I. Joe movie. So of course they had the G.I. Joe movie figures, Galobulus, who his thing bent, he was supposed to be a snake. And they had Nemesis Enforcer, who had his bat wings that was like a backpack you could take off, and he had like these weird tentacles, and I never knew the point of that, but there was that, so they tied in the movie. G.I. Joe back in the day had tons of giveaways. You can mail out for like this guy called The Fridge, who was, I think, a football player. They had a Super Trooper character, which was like basically a regular-looking Joe, just covered in like chrome armor, which I do have. Or hat, there we go. I don't have him anymore, but I do have his shield still. Big old chrome shield. So there was tons of giveaways all the time back in the day for that. You cut out, you buy 12 figures, you cut them out, like the points, and send them out, and 3 weeks later or 6 weeks later they send you the figure. Like Sergeant Slaughter, they had one. So there was always that. Then another interesting thing, like I had mentioned, is that they always had like some weird characters too. And a lot of the characters started coming with, like a lot of characters didn't come with vehicles, but a lot of characters started coming with, well, here's the weird character, like Crocmaster or Big Boa, which I thought these two were just awesome. They're awesome characters. But Crocmaster came in a croc, which I do have. There's this crocodile. And then I don't remember if the old Dusty had it, but the newer Dusty from the late 80s, 90s came with Sandstorm, which is a coyote. I'm trying to put them away as I go. But yeah, so they started coming with more accessories, and they started coming with, you know, pets or you know, whatever. What was it? Also, for instance, they started to get, not that it got stale, but I guess with the cartoon they tried to figure new ways to introduce old characters in a new way. So you would obviously, like, again, you would buy, you know, more stuff. In the late 80s and 90s, they made characters into the Python Patrol. Here's Copperhead. They changed his costume and gave him this weird crisscross. A Crimson Guard. They changed him. They made him part of the Python Patrol. So another way to sell figures, like, hey, you know what? The cartoon introduced it. Cobra Commando's like, I got this new thing that I developed, and I suck the essence of a python out, and I shoot the vehicles with it and the characters with it, and now you have better stealth, and you're like a python, and, you know, it made no sense whatsoever. But when you saw it, you're like, that's cool. Like, some of the Python vehicles were sick looking, and you're just like, wow, you know, I want that. And, you know, of course, it went nuts. But yeah. So I'm trying to keep on track here. Other characters, like they had the Alley Viper, I think was like the late 80s, which I don't have his stuff. He had like a little helmet that flipped down, and he came with a shield and a gun. But then later on, they reissued them. They changed his colors around, and as you can see, the thing falls down. It's his mask. They gave him a completely different shield that looks actually like Cobra's symbol. He still had the same backpack, and he had the same gun. But basically, the only difference is the color and the shield. That's all it was. Other than that, it's the exact same figure. Just different colors. So there was that. That's another way for them to make, you know, a small fortune. Be like, hey, you know what? We'll throw out the same character. We'll change slight things on him, change his color, and you got a whole new Viper. Which, again, it made sense. You're like, all right, it's a whole new set of Vipers they have. Another character. So I'm trying to make organization here. Again, Imagination, there's a guy called Salvo, which I don't have all his stuff, but he came with a gun that had these little mines that you could pull off and plant or whatever. And again, Imagination. And he had a missile launcher that had these missiles that, you know, you just kind of pushed, and they would, you know, fly out. You'd flick them and they'd fly out. But that's almost like the best you had, like in the 80s. Like, there was nothing was really spring-loaded until like the late 80s and 90s when they started getting out of hand with it. And that's what I'm going to start to go into now. You'll see my point. So you got this thing, you know, like I said, you flick it and the missile would shoot out. And you had to use your imagination that it was propelled. You know, you get the point. But in the 90s, they started putting out figures that basically they would either reissue a character and change them completely from their old thing. Like I said, here's the old wetsuit from the 80s. Then in the 90s, they reissued him so you could remove his helmet, which I don't have his helmet. He came with flippers, which I don't have, and a gun. But he also came with his own little sub kind of character. It came with 3 of these missiles. 2 you could put on the side here. See, that's actually the part I was talking about. You could see it, well, not too well, but kind of see the piece there that fit the missile. And you put another one, like I said, this is how spring stuff came into play. You'd put the missile in there, and boom, it would shoot off. You know, everything was spring-loaded. Ooh, dropping everything. Push the little thing in there and fire the missile out. So now you didn't even have to use your imagination all the way, because you just pointed at something and go, bam, I just blew that thing up. So there was that. Iceberg they redid. They made him with a new costume, and they gave him a snowboard, which was crazy, but fun. See? There was this character, which I think was the late 80s, 90s. There's a guy called Stalker. This guy right here came with like this weird like duck mask, which put that on. But the one thing I do not have that made this guy so different, other than the look, is he came with, here's an oar, he came with a kayak, like, and the thing was like that long. You had to put it together and he would have like this kayak thing. It was nuts. But it was cool. Again, accessories. It wasn't always about the G.I. Joe, it was about what accessories they had and what vehicles. Then you had Heavy Duty, another character. Came with this giant friggin' thing. Had 2 missiles that went in here that was spring. You push the button and they would shoot out. Had a giant, like, laser cannon, machine gun. Backpack would connect, and then had this little red thing I don't have anymore that would go over his eyes. So like an aim kind of thing. So there was that. But another thing that was very interesting, like I said as I'm going along, is like another character they changed, Cobra Commander. They made him all black costume. He usually have just blue, different variations. They gave him all black for the 90s one. But what's interesting, before I get into the final part of this, it's already long enough as it is, accessories, how they changed. Also, they started the late 80s, 89, 90, 91, 92, they started doing like environmental figures like the Eco Warriors, G.I. Joe Eco Warriors, which were like, they had protective suits on to handle like toxic vipers that, would shoot acid, or they would have, most of the time it was toxic waste. There was a guy called Sludge and Cesspool who had like a toxic waste, like face was rotted from toxic waste, and all his weapons would shoot toxic waste, and you had to have the eco friendly G.I. Joes that would come in, and they were specifically there to defeat them. And that got out of hand. That got really just like, they kept shoving like, the environment's going to shit, too much toxic waste, let's put it in everything. So it's just funny how cartoons always mirrored what was basically going on in real life anyway. But what's interesting, like I said, in the 90s figures, well, late 80s and 90s, everything had some kind of, like I said, it had an action, like dice here, part of Ninja Force. You could turn him, and he would turn back. He had like a spin action. Other characters had like their hand would chop, like Kung Fu grip kind of thing. So there was that. But another thing that was interesting is when they made the Ninja Force, they redid Zartan and made him completely different than what he looked like in the original thing, other than the mask. So they gave him a mohawk, bright colors. Everything in the late 80s and 90s was all about bright colors. So you could see the character, I guess, more than camouflage, just, But again, what was interesting is every character, G.I. Joe or Cobra, came with some form of a missile launcher that had to fire something, that had to have some kind of spring-loaded missile, which like they all came like that mostly. You can see this one came with the character. He's got a red switch. The exact same thing with a green switch. It came with another character. Same exact missile launcher. Then they had like this missile launcher. This one was a cool one. They had that missile launcher. They had this kind of a missile launcher, which actually this goes to the... There we go. You have the thing there. But every single character, even if it didn't make sense for that character to have a missile launcher, they had it. Ninjas had missile launchers. You're just kind of like, why does the ninja have a missile launcher? It doesn't make any sense. But they did. Everything had some kind of spring-related thing. It had to shoot a missile, it had to shoot something, or whatever. Which, I don't know, I thought it was cool because it's something you didn't see. But I also thought it kind of defeated the purpose of, I'm not saying playtime, but your imagination, because you're kind of like, alright, I can fire something now, but, I don't know, that was just me. But, another interesting thing, making a mess, again, like I said, with swapping, you had Storm Shadow, who was part of Cobra, then they switched him to a good guy, and gave him a new look, to be a G.I. Joe, and then in the 90s, they switched him again, to make him look like that, to obviously sell more, toys. But some of the figures, like a Ninja Force Snake Eyes, just horrible, horrible figure. His leg moves up and down. It doesn't do like half of the other stuff the other, like, it's gonna look messed up, but he can move his leg, do a split. He can't do that. He only goes up and down, and he had like, his arms would move. You can, kind of thing. But he was just a horrible, horrible character. Snake Eyes was always awesome, but that figure sucked. I don't know. Hopefully I made some kind of a point. I don't even know if I had a point. Which is fun, I guess, going nostalgia on everyone here. Yeah, just amazing how things change and prices and everything. Like the 25th anniversary, 30th anniversary, I gotta say, those figures they rock. Like, they're basically the old school G.I. Joe mixed with just new stuff. Like you could put their accessories in, like the actual holsters on their chest. You know, again, it doesn't leave anything up to your imagination, but it's still cool looking. Yeah, that'll do it. You know, hopefully I made some sense. I don't know. It's me rambling about the old days, which you'll see a lot on the show, believe me. But anyway, if you like, please hit the like button. Dislike if you want to. Comment away. I always love comments. If you really want, subscribe. And tell your friends about it. It's always a plus. Always cool to see new people, new opinions, all that stuff. And it's not the size of your key that matters. It's what you have in it. Later, everyone.